The desert stretched like an endless parchment, blank and breathless beneath the dying sun. A lone scholar rode through its heart, his robes heavy with dust, his satchel filled with notes on forgotten verses. The wind was still, unnaturally still, until a low hum began to rise, as if the horizon itself had begun to recite. He slowed his camel. The air trembled. Then came the sound, not thunder, not storm, but a whisper that seemed to crawl through sand and bone alike. He dismounted. The sky turned copper, clouds twisting in unnatural rhythm, and the whisper grew louder, forming words, scattered, broken, ancient. He pressed his ear to the ground. Beneath the layers of dust, he heard his own name. The scholar's heart faltered. He looked up and saw the dunes shifting, reshaping into the faint outline of a figure, tall, silent, motionless against the stormlight. The wind bent around it as if obeying a command. Fear gripped him, but curiosity, that old companion of every seeker, held him still. He recited a verse softly under his breath, his voice trembling against the roaring gale. Yet the wind seemed to echo him, repeating each word backward, distorted, mocking. Then came a moment of silence so sharp it seemed to pierce the air, and in it a single word formed, deep and resonant, layered in echo. Iblis. Lightning tore the sky open. For an instant, the figure was revealed, not beast nor man, but a shape made of smoke and memory. Its eyes were hollow light. Its mouth did not move, yet the name continued to echo within the scholar's mind. He stepped back, his feet sinking into sand that now pulsed with faint heat, as though the desert itself remembered a fire once kindled in defiance. He turned to flee, but the storm would not let him go. The wind circled him, lifting his robes, pushing him back toward the apparition. The dunes began to hum again, this time in rhythmic cadence, like verses half-remembered from a recitation long forbidden. The scholar dropped to his knees, whispering for protection, for clarity, for mercy. But the storm did not answer. It listened. It waited. Then, in the silence between two heartbeats, a single gust swept past him. Warm, heavy, alive. It carried with it the scent of smoke, of something ancient and forbidden. When he opened his eyes, the figure was gone. The sky was calm once more. Only the echo remained, faint, persistent, like a verse unwilling to fade. The scholar looked around. At his feet, half buried in sand, something glinted. He brushed away the dust and found a fragment of stone, inscribed not in Arabic, but in lines of flame-colored script. It pulsed once beneath his touch, then cooled into ash. He stared at the spot where it vanished. Somewhere beyond the dunes, thunder rumbled again, not distant, but watching. He felt it in his bones, a knowing older than man. He whispered to himself, voice shaking in awe and dread. What did this desert just remember? The wind carried no answer, only silence. A silence that felt alive, deliberate, as if the unseen waited for him to ask the next question, and Allah knows best. The scholar wandered until the storm's roar faded into a heavy, watchful quiet. The dunes had shifted during the tempest, revealing a hollow where the sand had been torn open by lightning. He descended carefully, each step sinking deeper until his fingers brushed against something solid, a slab of black stone carved with symbols that glowed faintly beneath the moonlight. The desert air trembled around it, warm as breath. He knelt beside the relic, tracing the lines with trembling hands. The script was unlike any he had seen, sharp, curling, alive. As his fingertips brushed one of the grooves, a pulse of light spread through the markings, illuminating a verse that burned into his mind. It spoke not of creation, but of defiance, of a fire that refused to kneel before clay. The words were not audible, yet he heard them within, rising from the depths of memory itself. He staggered back, heart racing. This was no myth. This was record, a witness carved in flame. He could almost see it, the gathering of the unseen, the command of the Most High, the moment of refusal. The air around him grew hotter, shimmering like a mirage. He could smell smoke that wasn't there, hear the echo of words that once shook the heavens. I am better than him. The scholar's eyes burned as he pressed his hand to his chest, feeling the weight of that ancient arrogance pressing close. He realized this tablet was not simply history, it was testimony, a covenant of fire buried beneath centuries of dust, waiting to be found by one who sought too deeply. The wind shifted again, carrying a low murmur, as if the desert itself whispered approval or warning. He wanted to flee, to seal this secret back beneath the earth, but his scholar's heart betrayed him. He began to copy the inscriptions into his journal, each line flickering for a moment, before fading into the paper, as if refusing to be contained. When he looked again, the slab had begun to crack, threads of light seeping out, spreading across the sand like veins of molten gold. He stepped back as the desert seemed to breathe, once, deeply. Then the light dimmed, leaving behind silence and ash. The stone was gone, consumed by its own glow. The scholar stood alone, the scent of smoke lingering in the air, and the echo of those defiant words still burning in his thoughts. He gazed toward the horizon where the storm had vanished, wondering if what he had uncovered was meant to remain hidden. Yet in the stillness, another realization struck him. The covenant was never buried. It lived on, written not in stone, but in hearts that still whisper, "I am better than him." The wind moved gently, like a sigh of warning, and in its trail he saw the faint outline of footsteps leading east, as if something unseen had walked away just before he arrived. He closed his eyes, feeling the desert's silence pressing in once more, knowing that the journey he began had already crossed into the realm of the unseen, and Allah knows best. Days passed as the scholar followed the faint trail east, his steps marked by silence and sleepless thought. The weight of the tablet's memory clung to him, its defiance, its fire, its echo that refused to die. Beyond the dunes the world changed. The sand thinned into paved stone, the horizon fractured by towering domes and shimmering spires. A city appeared before him, gleaming like a mirage, so bright it hurt his eyes. It was said to be a place of wealth, wisdom, and unmatched beauty, yet as he entered, something within him tightened. Every surface reflected light, polished marble, mirrored glass, golden tiles that captured his own gaze and returned it 100-fold. Everywhere he looked, he saw himself. The people moved gracefully through wide streets lined with fountains and perfumed smoke. But beneath the beauty he sensed an invisible pulse, a rhythm of pride, subtle yet suffocating. Faces shone with satisfaction, voices carried tones of superiority too smooth to notice. They bowed to one another, not in humility, but in performance. The city itself seemed alive with self-admiration, as though each mirror fed upon the reflection of another until the air thickened with vanity. The scholar walked among them unseen, his travel-worn robes earning him little more than glances of contempt. He sought the house of knowledge, a vast hall of mirrored walls and glass floors, where scholars debated under ceilings that reflected endless versions of themselves. He watched as they argued over wisdom, not to uncover truth, but to be admired for it. Their words glistened but held no light. He felt the faint whisper of the covenant stir again, that same tone of superiority that once spoke before angels. The city, for all its brilliance, reeked of that ancient arrogance. As evening fell, he wandered into a narrow street away from the grandeur. There, the reflections faded, and the silence felt human again. He found a small tea vendor, a man with worn hands and quiet eyes who offered him a seat without question. The scholar accepted, drinking in silence until he noticed something strange. The man's reflection in the brass pot beside him flickered faintly, not steady like others. Beneath his sleeve, a faint red mark glowed against the skin, shaped like an ember. The scholar's heart clenched. He had seen that color before, in the stone's fire, in the desert's pulse. The man caught his gaze and smiled faintly, as though recognizing his fear. "You've heard the whispers too," he said softly. "In this city they live within every mirror." His voice was calm, almost sorrowful. "Some of us see them for what they are, the faces we choose to worship." He looked toward the reflection shimmering across the street, where a group of nobles laughed beneath golden lamps. "They believe the bloodline is of flesh," he continued, "but pride needs no ancestry. It only needs a willing heart." Before the scholar could reply, the sound of laughter turned to shrieks. One of the great mirrored walls nearby began to ripple as though alive, the reflections twisting into grotesque distortions. Faces melted into smoke, eyes hollow, smiles stretching into endless mockery. People ran in terror as the mirrors cracked one by one, spilling shards of their own likeness across the marble. Amid the chaos, the humble man stood still, his mark now burning brighter. "It begins again," he whispered. "They always build cities of mirrors, and always forget who first desired to be reflected." The scholar turned toward the shattering light, realization dawning like fire behind his eyes. The bloodline was no myth, no lineage hidden in the shadows. It was an inheritance of pride passed through mirrors, through hearts, through choices. The city's brilliance was its curse, its beauty a veil for the oldest sin. When silence returned, the scholar stood among the broken glass, surrounded by 1,000 fragments of himself staring back. Somewhere in those reflections, he thought he saw eyes watching, not his own, not human. A quiet wind swept through the ruined street, carrying the faint scent of smoke once more. He bowed his head, whispering a verse for protection, and stepped deeper into the city's heart, where the mirrors still stood unbroken. And Allah knows best. Night fell heavy upon the city, its shattered mirrors glinting like fallen stars. The scholar and the humble man took shelter in a narrow courtyard veiled in dust. The air was thick with the scent of iron and smoke, the echo of chaos still trembling faintly in the distance. They sat in silence, neither daring to speak the name that hovered unspoken between them. The man's sleeve had slipped slightly, revealing again the ember-like mark pulsing against his skin. The scholar's gaze lingered on it, not with fear now, but with a growing, uneasy curiosity. The man noticed and drew his hand back. "It burns more each night," he murmured. "Sometimes I feel it awake before I do, whispering things I cannot bear to hear." His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion, the look of one who had wrestled too long with something unseen. "They told me I was chosen," he continued. "But chosen for what? I do not know." The scholar leaned closer, his voice low. "Who told you this?" The man hesitated. "In my dreams," he said finally, "there is a throne of smoke, and a figure who never moves. I cannot see his face, but I know his gaze. It sees everything I am ashamed of. He calls me his son." The words hung between them, trembling like the flame of a dying candle. The scholar felt a chill ripple through him, the echo of the tablet's fire, the desert's storm, the reflection's scorn, all converging in this one confession. Outside, the wind rose softly, carrying with it faint whispers that brushed against the walls. The scholar lifted his eyes toward the night sky, but even the stars seemed dimmer, veiled behind an unseen hand. He closed his eyes and began to recite verses for protection, but as the words left his lips, a sudden warmth bloomed beneath his palm. He froze. Slowly he looked down. A faint glow pulsed beneath his own skin, a line of fire mirroring the man's mark. It burned in rhythm with his heartbeat, neither pain nor comfort, only knowing. The scholar's breath caught. He tried to rub it away, but the glow persisted, fading only when he whispered the name of Allah aloud. The man stared at him wide-eyed. "It's spreading," he said. "It finds those who seek the truth too deeply." The scholar felt the ground tilt beneath his thoughts. Was this mark a curse or a reflection of something awakening within them both? The silence between them deepened until the air itself felt alive. A strange hum began to rise, faint at first, then stronger, resonating through the stones around them. The walls seemed to breathe with the same pulse as their marks. Suddenly a gust of hot wind swept through the courtyard, extinguishing the lantern. In the darkness, the scholar heard movement, slow, deliberate steps echoing from somewhere unseen. He turned toward the sound, his heart pounding. The air grew dense, heavy with the same smoke he had smelled in the desert. The man gripped his arm tightly, whispering, "He comes when we remember." Then silence, the kind that devours breath. When the scholar's vision adjusted, he saw nothing, only the faint afterglow of his mark fading from his hand, leaving behind a thin trace of ash. He trembled, realizing the truth buried beneath the fear. This mark was not placed upon him. It was drawn out of him, a sign not of possession, but of reflection. As dawn approached, the city lay still again. The man beside him slept uneasily, the ember beneath his skin flickering like a dying fire. The scholar sat awake, staring at his own hand, now bare and silent. The storm of mirrors, the covenant of fire, the whispering desert. They were not fragments of different signs, but a single chain leading him deeper into the unseen. He felt the weight of realization settle upon him like dust after battle. The mark of the fallen was not given to those chosen by darkness. It appeared to those who allowed pride to breathe within them. He had seen it, felt it, feared it, and now he wondered how much of it still lingered in his heart. The wind stirred again, soft as a warning, and he whispered into the silence, "O Lord, do not let the fire within me forget who made the light, and Allah knows best." The scholar left the city before the sun had fully risen, its pale light cutting through streets that no longer gleamed. The broken mirrors still caught fragments of dawn, but their reflections were hollow now, like empty eyes that remembered what they had seen. He carried with him the unease of the mark, though it no longer burned upon his hand. The memory of its glow was enough to haunt him. Behind him, the man with the embered skin had vanished in the night. Whether he fled or was taken, the scholar could not tell, but the whisper he left behind lingered. He comes when we remember. Days passed as he followed the faint trail of voices that seemed to rise from nowhere, whispers that threaded through the wind, drawing him toward the outskirts of a forgotten ruin. The place was ancient, its stones blackened with soot and time. No bird sang there, no breeze stirred. It was a place untouched by the world's rhythm, as though it had been set apart for something that did not belong to men. The scholar hesitated, his heart tightening with dread and strange anticipation. The mark beneath his skin began to pulse faintly again, not in pain, but in recognition. He descended into the ruin's heart, a vast chamber carved into the earth, lit only by the trembling glow of torches that burned without smoke. Shapes gathered around a central pit, men and women draped in dark fabric, faces obscured, their eyes reflecting a faint red sheen. Their voices rose in a low murmur, a cadence that felt older than language. The scholar pressed himself against the cold wall, listening. One voice stood out, calm, deep, measured. It spoke of inheritance, of a legacy not written in blood, but carried in the soul. "The line of Iblis," the voice intoned, "does not run through generations of flesh. It flows through hearts that bow to themselves." The words struck the scholar like thunder, the same truth he had begun to glimpse now spoken aloud in the depths of shadow. Another voice answered, softer, feminine, carrying a weight of sorrow. "Then we are all his children," she said, "for pride is the oldest seed in every heart." A murmur rippled through the assembly. Some nodded, others trembled. The speaker stepped forward, a woman with her face half lit by the torchlight, her eyes reflecting both grief and defiance. "The bloodline is not born," she continued. "It is chosen. Each soul writes its own descent when it prefers itself above truth." Her gaze drifted across the gathering and, for a moment, met the scholars through the shadows. Her eyes widened slightly, as though recognizing him, not by name, but by the faint ember hidden beneath his heart. The torches flickered violently, as if disturbed by a breath from beneath the earth. The leader of the assembly turned toward the pit, raising his arms. "The first fire awaits," he declared. "We return to the covenant denied not to bow, but to understand." The ground trembled. From within the pit, a faint glow began to rise, swirling like molten air. The scholar's instinct screamed at him to flee, but his feet refused. He felt drawn forward, helpless before the gravity of what was awakening. The woman who had spoken earlier stepped toward him, her expression urgent now. "Leave," she whispered. "You still hear the recitation within you. That means the light has not left your heart. This place is not for those who remember mercy." Her words came like a lifeline, cutting through the hum of the gathering. Before he could answer, a crack split the floor and a wave of heat surged upward. The voices of the assembly rose in chaotic unison, chanting something that seemed to tear through the air. The torches burst, and the chamber drowned in red light. The scholar stumbled backward, shielding his eyes. Through the rising smoke, he saw figures writhing in ecstasy, shadows bending as if possessed by their own reflections. The mark on his hand flared again, this time with pain. He bit back a cry, forcing himself toward the exit. The woman's voice echoing in his mind. This place is not for those who remember mercy. He reached the surface, gasping. The cold night wind striking his face like a revelation. Behind him the ruins sank into silence once more, as if the earth itself had swallowed the assembly whole. He fell to his knees, trembling, feeling the faint pulse of his heart against his burned palm. Somewhere deep below, the echoes of their chant still lingered, but he knew now, the inheritance of the fallen was not a secret gathering. It was a condition of the soul. The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of smoke once again, familiar, sorrowful, unending. The scholar rose, eyes fixed on the horizon, knowing that what awaited him next would not be found in darkness, but in the reflection of his own heart, and Allah knows best. The wind followed him long after he had left the ruins, whispering like an unseen witness that refused to fall silent. Each gust carried fragments of the voices he had heard below, the chants, the defiance, the sorrow. They echoed inside his thoughts, twisting into questions that he could no longer push away. Who among them was truly lost, and who among them merely saw too much of themselves? The scholar's steps faltered as he reached the edge of a dried riverbed. The night had deepened into stillness. Above him, the stars burned cold and sharp, their light unmoved by the turmoil below. He built a small fire, more for company than warmth. The flames danced weakly against the wind, flickering like a pulse that might at any moment cease. As he watched, the reflection of the fire in his eyes seemed to move independently, as though another presence looked back at him through its glow. He blinked, but the vision lingered, his own face, but slightly altered, the eyes darker, the mouth curved with something like disdain. A shadow that did not belong to the light. He tried to dismiss it as exhaustion, but his thoughts betrayed him. Pride, envy, superiority. They whispered with familiar intimacy, weaving through his prayers like smoke through cloth. He thought of the city, the assembly, the mark that had burned beneath his hand. Each had mirrored a truth he wished not to claim. The scholar bowed his head, pressing his palms to his face. The memory of the woman's voice returned. You still hear the recitation within you. That means the light has not left your heart. Yet what good was light if it only revealed the darkness within? He whispered verses softly, hoping to silence the noise inside, but the words felt distant, hollow. His voice trembled, faltered, then stopped entirely. For the first time since the storm, he felt the weight of solitude, not of the body, but of the spirit. It was as if the world had drawn a boundary around him, leaving him suspended between two realities, one of faith, one of fire. The trial was no longer before him. It was within, the flames dimmed. In the faint orange glow, he saw movement, not physical but reflected in the air like a memory taking form. He saw himself as he had once been, a scholar proud of knowledge, proud of comprehension, proud of his piety. The image smiled, his own lips curving in silent mockery, and then spoke without sound, its meaning clear. You study arrogance but do not recognize your own. The words struck deeper than any wound. He rose to his feet, heart pounding, but the reflection followed, matching his every motion. He turned away, whispering supplications, but the air seemed to absorb them, returning nothing. His breath came faster, each inhale a struggle against a pressure he could not name. Then with sudden clarity he understood. This was the covenant's weight, not a curse upon him, but a mirror demanding truth. The mark had faded from his skin only to appear in his soul, revealing what no eye could see. The test was never of fire, but of recognition. He fell to his knees, pressing his forehead to the ground. The sand was cold, grounding. His tears fell into it like rain upon barren soil. "O Allah," he whispered, voice shaking, "if arrogance lives within me, burn it before it grows. Let the fire that once defied you consume only what keeps me from bowing." His words broke apart in the wind, carried into the darkness. For a long moment there was nothing. Then a stillness descended, deep, encompassing, as though the desert itself held its breath. The reflection vanished, the fire stilled, and in its quiet heart, the scholar felt something shift. A weight lifting, not removed, but understood. He rose slowly, the remnants of pride still flickering faintly within him, but tempered now by humility. The trial had not ended. It had only begun, for every breath that followed would test which fire he chose to feed. As dawn crept over the horizon, pale and new, he walked onward. The desert stretched ahead, silent, infinite, a mirror too vast to escape, and Allah knows best. The sun rose pale and distant, casting the desert in a haze of gold and ash. The scholar walked for hours beneath its weight, his thoughts circling like vultures. The trial had left him hollow, emptied, yet restless. Each step felt heavier, as though unseen eyes followed his journey. When dusk returned, he found refuge in the remnants of an abandoned caravanserai. Cracked walls leaned against one another, their shadows stretching long across the sand. Within, silence pressed close, thick with the memory of lives long gone. He kindled a small fire once more, the flame trembling like a living thing, wary of its own light. As he sat before it, exhaustion dulled his senses. The flickering glow painted shapes upon the wall, shifting, breathing forms that seemed to move when he did not. Then one of them froze, sharper, clearer than the rest. It was his reflection, carved in flame, eyes burning with the same golden hue as the fire itself. For a heartbeat he thought it a trick of light, but the reflection blinked, not in harmony with him, but of its own will. The air grew dense. The fire leaned forward as though reaching for him. His reflection rose within it, standing taller, its voice emerging from the crackle of burning wood. It did not speak in words, but in thoughts, fluent, intimate, accusing. You pray for humility, yet fear to lose your name. You seek truth, but only when it crowns you as its discoverer. The scholar's pulse quickened. He wanted to deny it, to cast the vision aside as temptation, but the voice pressed closer, relentless. You study Iblis as if he were distant, yet how often have you thought yourself better than another? His lips parted, but no defense came. The reflection smiled, not cruelly, but knowingly, as though unveiling a secret long concealed. The scholar's throat tightened. He realized the voice was not foreign. It was the echo of every silent arrogance he had ever buried beneath virtue. The flame within the hearth swelled, the walls flickering with its restless heat. He turned away, whispering verses under his breath, but his reflection did not vanish. Instead, it stepped closer to the edge of the fire, its face now inches from his own, divided only by the veil of heat. The scholar's voice trembled as he spoke aloud. You are not me. The reflection tilted its head. No? Then why do I move when you breathe? Why do I burn when you doubt? You feared the mark upon your hand, but it was never a curse. It was recognition. You are the clay that envies the flame. The word struck him like a blade. For a moment, rage flared, the same rage that had driven Iblis to defiance. He wanted to silence the voice, to prove it wrong. But in that instant of anger, the fire roared higher, feeding upon his pride. He stumbled back, realizing the truth too late. The mirror of flame did not create evil, it merely revealed it. The reflection laughed softly, fading as the fire consumed itself, until only embers remained. In the dying glow, the scholar saw his own trembling hands. He sank to his knees, the air thick with the scent of burnt dust and regret. When the last spark died, darkness enveloped the chamber. Yet in that darkness, a fragile peace began to unfold. He understood now that the reflection was not an enemy, but a reminder, that the fire within could only be conquered by surrender, not by strength. He whispered into the stillness, voice low and weary. If the flame shows me what I am, then let me face it until I am nothing but light again. Outside, the night wind passed gently through the ruin, carrying the faint scent of cooled ash. Somewhere far beyond the dunes, thunder murmured, not in anger, but in warning. The scholar closed his eyes, feeling both the fear and the mercy within that sound. His reflection was gone, yet he knew it waited, as all mirrors do, for the next spark of arrogance to awaken it once more, and Allah knows best. Dawn arrived muted, its light pale and uncertain as it touched the ruined walls. The scholar woke to silence, his fire long extinguished. The scent of cooled ash lingered, clinging to his robes like memory. His eyes felt heavy from dreams he could not recall, though the sense of being watched still lingered. He gathered his satchel and walked toward the horizon, where the desert stretched endlessly, shimmering under the early sun. The wind whispered again, low and constant, carrying grains of dust that brushed against his skin like a pulse, as if the earth itself breathed. He followed that rhythm until the dunes gave way to a valley, dry and wide, the air strangely cool. In the heart of that barren valley stood a lone tree, brittle and gray, yet rooted deep in lifeless soil. Beneath its shadow sat a child. Barefoot, wrapped in rags, the boy's skin was covered in the fine dust of the desert. His eyes, large and steady, watched the scholar approach without fear. There was no village nearby, no path that led here, and yet the boy sat as though he had been waiting for him. The scholar slowed his pace, uncertain. "Peace be upon you," he said softly. The boy tilted his head. "And upon you," he replied, his voice clear but hollow, as though it came from a distance far greater than the valley itself. The scholar crouched beside him, studying his small hands pressed into the dust. "Where are your parents?" he asked. The boy's gaze lifted to the horizon. "I have none," he said simply. "I was shaped from what remains." His words made the air still. "From what remains?" the scholar echoed. The boy nodded, pointing to the ground. "From what was left after fire forgot to burn." The scholar's breath caught. He looked closer at the boy's skin. Under the thin layer of dust, faint streaks of gold shimmered when the sunlight touched them, fading as quickly as they appeared. "Do you know my name?" the boy asked suddenly. The question startled him. "No, child," he said. "Should I?" The boy smiled faintly, the kind that carried neither joy nor sorrow. "You sought the truth of the fire," he said, "but you forgot the patience of the clay." The scholar froze, a chill rising through his chest. The child's words felt older than his voice, as if spoken by something that had seen creation itself. He tried to speak, but the boy continued. "The one who burned refused to bow, but the one made of dust forgot to remember why he was shaped. Both carry pride, though only one fell." The scholar sank to his knees. "Who are you?" he whispered. The boy turned his eyes to the sky, watching the sun climb higher. "A reminder," he said quietly, "of what men bury when they rise too high. You chase the shadow of Iblis, but you never stop to see the dust that gave you form." His words cut through the still air like a revelation. The scholar looked around, feeling the valley shift, the wind circling them, stirring the dust into spirals. It rose and danced, shimmering with faint light, forming shapes that flickered like half-seen memories. Faces of men, fragments of pride, the fleeting glow of repentance. When the dust settled, the boy stood. "There is a spring beyond this valley," he said. "Its water runs clear only to those who see themselves without pride." He began to walk away, leaving no footprints behind. The scholar called out, but the child did not turn. "Wait, what are you?" The boy paused at the edge of the horizon and looked back once. "Something your kind forgets they are made of," he answered. Then, as the wind rose, his form dissolved into dust, carried away in silence. The scholar remained kneeling beneath the barren tree, his heart trembling. He touched the soil, dry, warm, yet alive. For the first time, he felt its pulse beneath his fingertips, slow and patient, like the heartbeat of the world. Tears welled in his eyes as he realized that every particle of dust was both creation and reminder, humble, enduring, and closest to prostration. The wind whispered again, softer now, almost gentle. He looked toward the horizon, where faint green shimmered in the distance, the promise of the spring the child had spoken of. He rose, feeling the weight of revelation settle upon him, not as burden, but as mercy. The fire within him had been loud, demanding, defiant. The dust was quiet, yielding, eternal. He understood now that his journey was not to escape the fire, but to remember what the fire had envied. And as he began to walk toward the spring, The valley behind him seemed to breathe once more, carrying the echo of the child's voice, light as sand on wind. And Allah knows best. The journey to the spring was long and wordless. The wind had softened, and the world seemed to hold its breath as the scholar crossed the valley. Every step sank into the dust the child had left behind, each grain glinting faintly under the sun as though carrying a trace of light unseen before. He followed the shimmer until the ground began to change. The sand gave way to stone, smooth and cool, and the air grew thick with a scent both sweet and mournful, the fragrance of water long hidden. Ahead, a faint mist rose from the earth, glowing softly like the breath of dawn. When he reached the spring, he stopped. The water lay still, clear as glass, its surface reflecting both sky and soul. It did not flow like ordinary water, it pulsed, as though alive. He knelt beside it, cupping his hands to drink, but before the water touched his lips, he saw movement beneath its surface. Something rested there, a shape, a shadow, a forgotten memory. Slowly he reached into the spring, and his fingers brushed the corner of something solid. It felt like stone, yet light as parchment. He lifted it free and found a small, weathered book, bound in material that shimmered between silver and ash. The cover bore no title, but when his thumb traced the faint etchings, they shifted into words, not written in any tongue of men, but understood by the heart. The Book of Regret. He opened it carefully. The pages were warm to the touch, each inscribed with sentences that seemed to breathe as he read them. They were confessions, the voices of those who had once walked the same path of pride, who had seen the truth too late. Their words poured through him, not as ink, but as feeling, sorrow, humility, an ache that transcended time. He read of jinn who had turned from arrogance, of scholars who had mistaken knowledge for light, of kings who wept in the dust of their own thrones. Every line was a mirror, every story a reflection of his own heart. The pages did not accuse, they invited, reminding him that repentance was not the extinguishing of fire, but its redirection toward the warmth of remembrance. His hands trembled as he turned each page, for with every confession, the letters began to fade, dissolving into the paper until the surface was blank. The words did not vanish. They passed into him, carried into his soul like seeds into fertile soil. When he reached the final page, he found no writing, only the faint outline of a handprint pressed into the parchment. Instinctively he placed his palm upon it. A warmth spread through his arm, not burning, but alive. The same glow that once marked his hand, now gentle, transformed. The air around him shimmered. The spring rippled, reflecting not his face but something higher, a soul bending in recognition, humbled yet radiant in surrender. For a moment, he saw within the water the image of countless others, faces unknown, each bowed in regret and remembrance, their tears forming the spring itself. He withdrew his hand, and the book closed on its own. The surface of the spring stilled once more, calm as before, save for a faint light that lingered where he had touched it. He placed the book beside the water, understanding now that it was not meant to be kept, but discovered by those who needed its truth. The dust from the valley swirled gently, resting upon the cover like a seal of completion. He whispered softly, "Regret is not the end, but the bridge back to mercy." A soft wind stirred, carrying with it the child's voice, distant yet near. Those who bow in regret do not fall, they rise through the dust. The scholar closed his eyes, his heart steady, his breath slow. The pride that once shadowed him had turned to gratitude, his fear to peace. The book glowed faintly once more, then dissolved into light, scattering like stars across the surface of the spring. The scholar watched in silence, knowing he had been allowed to witness something sacred, the repentance of those who had once shared his flaw, now written into the very fabric of the earth. He rose, the reflection of the water lingering in his eyes. The wind was still now, but the quiet carried a message deeper than words. Pride burns, but regret purifies. He turned away from the spring, the path ahead clear, illuminated by the soft afterglow of divine mercy that followed him into the coming night, and Allah knows best. The night deepened as the scholar left the valley. the sound of the spring fading behind him until it became memory. The stars above burned with unusual clarity, each one a silent witness to the journey that had brought him here, from storm to fire, from mirrors to dust. The air was cool now, filled with the scent of sand and quiet renewal. As he walked, the wind rose once more, no longer a whisper of warning but a guiding breath, gentle and steady. It carried him back toward the city of mirrors, the place where his path had first fractured. He felt no fear now, only the gravity of completion, as though the world itself waited for his return. By dawn, the city appeared on the horizon, its spires dull and cracked, stripped of their false brilliance. The mirrors that once covered every wall were broken, their shards reflecting the pale sky like scattered truth. He walked through its streets in silence, passing faces that now bore the weariness of revelation. The laughter that had once filled these corridors was gone. In its place, quiet voices recited verses, soft and uncertain but sincere. Pride had lost its crown. The city had seen its own reflection, and survived. He moved toward the central square where a fountain once shone like glass. Now it stood dry, its basin filled with dust. People gathered there, humble, silent, their eyes following him not as a man of knowledge, but as a fellow seeker. The scholar climbed the worn steps of the fountain and stood before them. The wind caught his cloak, lifting it slightly as if urging him to speak, but his voice was not one of authority. It was the trembling voice of a man who had finally understood. "Brothers and sisters," he said, "we sought light and found mirrors. We studied arrogance and became its students. We chased perfection while forgetting who made us from what cannot boast, dust. Pride is not a creature that walks among us. It is the echo that lives within. It is the inheritance of the first who refused to bow. Every time we say, 'I am better,' we feed the same fire that defied the command of our Lord." His words hung in the air, heavy with truth and sorrow. The crowd lowered their heads, and even the wind seemed to listen. He knelt then, the dust cool beneath his palms. "But there is mercy," he whispered. "Even for the fire if it would bow." He placed his forehead to the ground. The movement was slow, deliberate, the culmination of every question, every trial. Around him others followed, one by one. The people who had once lived for their reflection now bent their foreheads to the same earth they had once feared to touch. The silence that followed was profound, stretching through the city like a pulse of light. In that moment, the scholar felt the world shift. The storm that had once called his name now returned, not in fury, but in calm. Clouds rolled across the sky, parting the sunlight into threads of gold. A breeze swept through the square, stirring the dust into motion until it shimmered like liquid light. It swirled around them, gentle, weightless, then rose into the air, dissolving toward the heavens. The scholar lifted his head. His face was streaked with tears, his heart emptied of pride. He looked to the horizon and saw it, the faint outline of the child of dust, standing where the sky met the earth. The boy raised a hand, neither beckoning nor farewell, only acknowledgement. Then as the wind passed, he vanished into light. The scholar smiled, his breath steady, his spirit quiet. He turned his gaze upward, whispering softly. The fire defied, but the dust remembered. The people rose slowly behind him, their eyes open to a new stillness. The mirrors that lined the streets caught the morning light once more, not to glorify faces, but to reflect the sky. The scholar stood among them, humbled, transformed. For the first time he felt peace not as an end, but as beginning, the quiet after repentance, the silence in which truth resides. As the wind carried the last grains of dust into the dawn, he bowed his head once more, not in ritual, but in remembrance, a final act of surrender, a final prostration to the one who had always waited. The city breathed with him, united in stillness, the fire at last subdued by the humility of clay. And Allah knows best.